我家以后没有人呐，我就是我。
There will be no one left in my family. I'm the last generation of my family. There will never be another poor person in my family again. Because I live a carefree life, I have no mortgage or car loan to pay off. I don't have a wife or children to support. As long as I'm full, my family isn't hungry. The man smiles widely as he talks about his current lifestyle. No marriage, no children, no house, no car. In recent years, more and more young people in China are adopting this four no's lifestyle. Do you want to have children in the future?
没有，不要，我能把它生出来。
No, I don't. I could give birth to one, but I don't think I have the ability to raise them well.
现在年轻人生孩子的话是
How many children do you think is best for young people to have now?
I think not having children is the best, because the pressure to have children is too great.
If you could have children, how many would be best?
No children, none.
How many children is ideal?
0. The young people interviewed by this vlogger all express a firm lack of desire to have children. Even among couples, both partners stated they were unwilling to have kids. Why are more and more young people choosing not to have children? Is this generation becoming more selfish, lazy, and irresponsible? Or are they becoming more awakened?
没钱，真的是没钱。有钱的话，谁不想生啊？多可爱！
No money, really no money. If I had money, who wouldn't want to have children? Actually, if my child were to born just to inherit my poverty and my suffering, I think not having a child is a kind of kindness to them.
Why should I have children? What's the point of having them? In today's society, even if I have a child, they'll just end up working like a donkey. And then they'll scold me. Why didn't you find me a good job? Why aren't you lenders? Why aren't you officials? Why aren't you part of the rich generation? Why should I suffer with you?
很多人恋爱前提就是得有房，但是
Many people's prerequisite for being in a relationship is having a house, but now housing prices are just too high. It's not that I don't try, it's just that effort doesn't lead to results. The competition is so intense now, it's quite helpless. Because I'm powerless to change it, and the unpaid wages have been overdue for quite a long time. The trust crisis has already emerged, so I might be more disappointed with the world. My goal is to live for another 30 years, aiming for 60. As for after 60, I'll treat small illnesses, and for serious ones, I'll just wait to die. That's why I don't get married and don't want children. My greatest act of fatherly love is not bringing my child into this terrible world. The poverty and suffering of these young people, the terrible world they live in, and the disappointment with the world, what do they mean by this, and where does it come from? According to the 2024 China Fertility Cost Report, the average cost of raising a child aged 0 to 17 nationwide is 680,000 yuan. In first-tier cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and Zhejiang province, the cost is nearly twice the national average. People have expressed, this is a conservative estimate. Just the tutoring fees for a child each year cost tens of thousands. Today's young people really have it tough. How can they live on a few thousand yuan in wages? It's really hard. In China, how much does it actually cost to raise a child to adulthood? Pregnancy costs 10,000 yuan, while giving birth and postpartum care costs between 10 to 20,000 yuan. The basic living expenses for a child under 3 years old amounts to 50,000 to 60,000 yuan. From ages 3 to 6, various youth entertainment activities cost at least 30,000 yuan per year on average. After the child enters elementary school at age 7 and all the way through high school, school fees, after-school care, tutoring, and pocket money average between 20,000 to 30,000 yuan per year. By the time the child attends university, at least 350,000 yuan is needed. Once the child is in college, monthly living expenses, and the dowry after graduation and marriage, which can easily reach tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands, will become another heavy burden for the parents. This is still the ideal situation, not factoring in inflation and unexpected expenses. After all, in China's healthcare system, the cost of illness and medical treatment are a significant financial burden for ordinary families. If it's a chronic illness or a severe condition, the treatment costs may drain an entire family's savings. Of course, these are the basic costs of raising a child in an average city. If the child in a rural area finishes middle school and then goes to work in a factory, that's a different story. How has the Chinese government responded to the high cost of raising children? In response to the unwillingness of the younger generation to have children, the Chinese government implemented the three-child policy in 2021, allowing couples to have up to 3 children. In 2025, it introduced child-rearing subsidies. In Hefei Anhui province, a one-time subsidy of 2,000 yuan for the second child and 5,000 yuan for the third child. In Jinan, Shandong province, families receive a monthly subsidy of 600 yuan for each second child until they turn 3. But this policy has not yet been rolled out nationwide and is still in pilot phases in local areas with financial support. In other words, according to current policies, if you respond to the government's call and have 3 children, the maximum reward you can receive is about 7,000 to 22,000 yuan. It sounds nice, but what about the reality? According to statistics, the total cost of raising 3 children to adulthood is about 2 million yuan. In other words, the government subsidies barely cover a fraction of the child-rearing costs. This level of support is almost laughable. Ironically, many of those making these policy decisions come from high-ranking official families, where their own children are sent abroad to study, immigrate, and obtain foreign citizenship. They spend millions, even tens of millions of yuan to plan for their children's futures, yet they believe that a few thousand yuan in rewards will motivate ordinary young people to shoulder the heavy burden of childbirth and child-rearing. For young families struggling with mortgage payments, wage stagnation, and educational anxiety, this small subsidy barely covers a few months of baby formula and early education fees. The real issue has never been that young people are unwilling to have children, but rather that they cannot afford to or dare not have them. In the face of the high cost of housing, education, healthcare, and retirement, these so-called fertility incentives seem more like an underestimation of the cost of living for ordinary citizens, even a disregard for the realities of life for average families. If having 1 child comes with a reward of a house, how many would you be willing to have?
I wouldn't have more, just 1, yes.
But a house as a reward.
I'm not having more children.
I want to ask, what's the reason?
Because I believe the cost of raising a child is more than just 1 house.
If having 1 child comes with a reward of a house, would you be willing to have more children?
No, I wouldn't.
Why is that?
I don't think children and a house are necessarily linked.
What if the house could be replaced with a child-rearing fund?
Well, I think the house won't be worth much by then, so it wouldn't matter.
From the vlogger's interviews with several young people on the streets of Shanghai, it seems that even with the reward of a house for having children, this group of young people still don't have a strong desire to have children, let alone more. The sky-high housing prices, hefty mortgages, and unfinished buildings with no legal recourse have already become deeply rooted in social issues in China. An ordinary person takes out an 800,000 loan to buy a house, and that pretty much ruins their life. Let's take our average income in Bengbu, which is 4,000 yuan, as an example. With an 800,000 yuan loan, at the current mortgage rate of 3.1%, you would have to pay 3,400 yuan a month. After paying the mortgage, you're left with just 600 yuan per month. And this is in 2025. Can 600 yuan really cover your living expenses for a month? What is a mortgage? A mortgage is like being pressed down, peeling layer by layer. You say you don't have a decent provider fund, and you don't have a stable job in the system, yet you still want to bear such a high mortgage? Have you lost your mind? In recent years, China's unfinished buildings have been pushing thousands of ordinary people into unsolvable predicaments. On the surface, this appears to be an economic issue caused by a developer's funding failure. But a deeper look reveals the collapse of the entire real estate industry's high leverage model. For the past decade or so, China's real estate market has largely operated on a pre-sale system. Developers sell properties up front to secure buyers' money, which they then use to build the buildings, repay loans, and purchase land. As long as property prices continue to rise, this model can keep rolling forward. But when the market cooled and financial regulations tightened, the 3 red lines were enforced, and suddenly, the funding chain was broken. With buildings left unfinished and funds depleted, unfinished buildings began to pile up. The most helpless are those homebuyers who have poured their life savings into purchasing a property. The down payment has been made, the mortgage has been taken on, but the house has turned into a half-finished pile of steel and concrete. Legal action, after numerous collective pensions, there is often no result. Waiting, no one knows how many years it will take before there is any resolution. Many people can't hold on anymore. They can't afford to rent, they can't live in the house, so they are forced to move into an unfinished building ahead of schedule. There's no official water or electricity. During winter, they rely on electric heaters, and in summer, they run temporary power lines themselves. Some buildings don't even have elevators installed, and people carry gas cylinders up dozens of floors to cook. These places, which should be temporary construction sites, have become their real homes.
我是干什么不花钱，我钱都给他了，30万都给他了，我现在手里边没有钱租房子。
Why shouldn't I spend money? I've already given him all my money, 300,000 yuan. Now I don't have any money left. I can't even afford to rent a house. I can show you my WeChat. I'm using credit cards now. I've maxed out several tens of thousands already. How am I supposed to pay it back? Over here is the mortgage. Over there is the credit card. And over there is the rent.
今天是入住烂尾房的第49天。
Today is the 49th day of living in an unfinished building. In March 2021, I took out a loan to buy a house at the BGI Felicity Garden in Lingyi. It has now been delayed by more than 9 months, with over a year of no normal construction and only symbolic work being done. On August 31st, 2024, as a single parent, I no longer had the ability to continue renting. In this helpless situation, I had no choice but to move into my 22nd floor apartment, which had no doors or windows, no water or electricity, and live there with my 2 children.
So when people question, why are young people today increasingly unwilling to have children? The answer is already written in these unfinished buildings. When you can't even guarantee a decent roof over your head, who would dare to take on the burden of 3 children? A house can drain a family of their savings for over a decade. A legal fight can leave parents' knees aching. A subsidy is only enough to buy a few cans of baby formula. When you can barely afford a home, how can anyone talk about fertility intentions? In this reality, having children isn't just a responsibility, it feels more like a high-stakes gamble. Of course, unfinished buildings are just the tip of the iceberg. What truly crushes the young generation is the employment survival net. When finding a job becomes a matter of luck, salaries are a joke, housing prices are an unattainable ceiling, and even getting married is beyond reach. How can anyone talk about having children? Not to mention the hyper-competitive environment. Right after graduation, you're working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, and if you slack off for even a moment, someone is lining up to replace you. Forget raising children, many young people are on the brink of being worn out themselves.
天哪，完全没有想到2025年找工作。
I never expected that finding a job in 2025 would be harder than last year. A few days ago, a friend of mine who graduated from Zhejiang University complained to me that the entire department has been laid off. He has been working at this state-owned enterprise since graduation, and we all thought it was a secure job. But who would have thought that they would notify him that he must find a new job within 30 days? He was completely stunned because no one expected that even a job at a state-owned enterprise could be this unstable.
今年找工作不是你感觉难。
Finding a job this year isn't just difficult, it's really, really hard. This year, if you're looking for a job, you'll encounter 2 extremes. On one hand, the unemployment rate remains stubbornly high, and on the other, good companies can't find suitable candidates. Why are these 2 extremes happening? My most intuitive feeling is that this year, companies want to hire high-quality talent for extremely low wages. You can't even find a waiter for 3,000 yuan, but you can hire a bunch of new graduates. Jobs that people actually want aren't hiring, and money-making jobs are cutting people. Is it really because we can't take off the long gown of Confucianism like Kong Yi Ji? We just want a stable job that can at least guarantee basic survival. Why is that so difficult?
现在的学历怎么这么廉价？
How is a degree so cheap now? I spent over 10 years on my education, 7 years for both my undergraduate and graduate degrees, with an annual tuition of 18,000 yuan. After my interview, I'm facing a salary of just 2,500 yuan.
After watching these videos, there's really no need for further explanation. For young people, the issue is not simply, do you want to have children, but can you afford to have them? Graduation equals unemployment. Job positions are shrinking, and competition is becoming increasingly brutal. Layoffs have become the norm, and internships, labor dispatch, and short-term contracts dominate the job market. Even if you're lucky enough to find a job, the salary doesn't keep up with the rising cost of living or housing prices. An ordinary person would have to live without eating or drinking for over a decade just to afford a decent home. Marriage is supposed to be built on a solid economic foundation, but when that foundation is barely a shadow, who would dare to step into marriage casually? Raising children is a financial marathon in itself. Education, healthcare, housing, none of them are easy to handle. At its core, today's young people are facing high housing prices that drain their savings, intense competition that squeezes their time, and the rising cost of living that depletes their resources, all without adequate social security to fall back on. Having children is no longer just a personal choice, it has become a test of one's overall ability to survive. This series of interconnected social issues is slowly pushing young people to the edge of survival. They struggle in an uncertain job market, worry about unaffordable housing, burn out in the cutthroat workplace, and are stopped in their tracks by the soaring cost of raising children. When survival itself becomes a luxury, having children inevitably becomes an unattainable goal. As a result, the birth rate continues to decline, shifting from not wanting to have children to not daring to have children, and finally to not being able to afford children. This has become an unavoidable reality for society as a whole. China's birth rate has dropped dramatically from about 22.6 million in 1974 to just 9.5 million in 2024. This sharp decline in birth rates is so significant, even to an exaggerated extent, if that forces us to reflect on the underlying causes. In 2024, China's total fertility rate is just 1.08, not only remaining below the internationally recognized 1.3 warning threshold for 5 consecutive years, it is also far below the 2.1 replacement level needed for population sustainability. This means that, on average, each couple is only having just over one child, and the population size can no longer naturally maintain itself. At the same time, the net population decline has reached almost 1.4 million, with the death toll rising to about 10.9 million. China has entered the era of negative population growth. What's even more alarming is that this is just the beginning. In academic circles, this is referred to as the ultra-low fertility trap. It is a long-term decline in fertility rates, a shrinking young population, rising child-rearing costs, decreased willingness to have children among women, and changing attitudes towards marriage and childbearing. It creates a vicious cycle that ultimately makes it nearly impossible for fertility rates to recover naturally. Once trapped in this cycle, even with government subsidies and incentive policies, it is difficult to reverse the overall trend. Japan, South Korea, and many European countries have all struggled within this trap, and China is slipping into the trap at an even faster rate. The consequences are already beginning to show in reality. In 2023, a large number of kindergarteners across the country closed down. According to official statistics, the number of kindergartens nationwide dropped by 5,630 in 2023, setting a new record high. Many areas are experiencing the phenomenon of not enough children to enroll and teachers unable to stay, with the early childhood education sector starting to shrink across the board. Some newly built kindergartens have already been forced to shut down in the same year they opened. The underlying reason is simple: there are fewer and fewer newborns. At the same time, the social support structure is starting to become imbalanced. The pressure of supporting the elderly has surged, and the labor force is shrinking. Young people are not only responsible for raising the next generation, but also for bearing the burden of a growing elderly population. This directly drags down the country's overall economic growth potential and the sustainability of social security. China is facing an unprecedented population crisis. This is not just a choice of a single generation, it concerns the stability and development of society as a whole. Nowadays, young people in China choose not to marry or have children, not out of selfishness or laziness, but because the harsh realities have left them with no other options. The high cost of having children, unaffordable housing prices, the cutthroat workplace, and failing healthcare system, the brutal realities of retirement, and the government's inadequate subsidy policies have turned childbearing into a not-so-personal choice. It has become a high-stakes survival gamble that one dares not enter lightly. In the eyes of today's young people, the terrible world they face is actually the bitter result of decades of systemic accumulation. And behind this grim reality, we can't help but think of the one-child policy disaster orchestrated by the CCP. How could a normal society use planned directives to control the reproductive rights of families? The brutal enforcement of the one-child policy, with countless forced abortions, fines, family fractures, and moral tragedies, has long planted the cold seeds in Chinese society. Today's sharp population decline, the despair of young people about the future, and the society's fear of the next generation are nothing but the inevitable consequences of the violent policy from those years. As a young person said in the street interview, "My greatest act of fatherly love is not bringing my child into this terrible world. It's not that young people have failed the era, it's that this era has coldly failed them. It's not that they don't want to become parents, they fear becoming the bearers of the same suffering their parents endured. And who's the source of all this? Who is responsible for forcing an entire generation to give up on the future in a reality where hope is nowhere to be found?